Good morning. Today is Wednesday, August 25th, 2021, and this is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearing. There are 5 cases on the agenda today. The first case is RPC 14013-046. The property is located at 1010 North Glebe Road. The agent is Ms. Borman and the assessor is Mr. Peralta. And Mr. Peralta, you wanted to say something before we heard the case?
Yes, the department will, I guess, present a different value for this case. We sent it out to Ms. Borman, to which I believe she agreed. I'm not going to speak for her, but Ms. Borman and Mr. Harmon can speak on that. Do you want the new value that we're going to present?
Yes.
It's $47,954,300.
Okay. All right, then Ms. Borman, you can start with your 8 minutes, or I guess Mr. Harmon, whoever's going to speak. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Members of the board, good morning. Thank you all for your time. We have received the county's revised number, and we do find that acceptable, and would like to thank the county and Mr. Peralta specifically for their time and attention with this property.
All right, then Mr. Peralta, if you want to tell us how you got to that number.
Yes, we reached well, not sure how to talk specifics without talking about the numbers. Let's see if I can do that.
Mr. Peralta, would it be fair to say that the difference is that you determined that the vacancy rate of 25% should be applied instead of what was in the test column?
Yes.
And that you also changed the cap rate from the test column to the appropriate cap rate for the property?
Yes.
And that otherwise you used your test column?
Yes.
Okay.
I assume the cap rate went to 7.1, Mr. Peralta?
Yes, it did.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's what we're going to hear from both sides. Do any of the board members have questions? No? I can't see everybody. There we go.
No questions.
No questions. All right. All right, then that is a reduction. So I will move to accept the county's revised number of $47,954,300.
I'll second.
Okay, so that is a motion, a second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Mary, this is Ken. Can you hear or see me?
I can hear you. Yes, sir.
Okay, I have a new arrangement here. I'm just probably going to be off the screen because I can't figure out how to get on. Thank you.
Okay. Are you voting with?
I'm aye.
Okay.
I'll say it out if you can hear me.
Okay, so it is unanimous. It's been reduced to $47,954,300 based on both parties agreeing.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, Mr. Peralta, and the county.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you all. All right.
Okay. Do we have Mr. Steinhauser?
Good morning.
There you are. Thank you. And do we have Mr. Chikas? Oh, there's Mr. Chikas. Okay, perfect. All right. The second case on the agenda is RPC 15012-063. The property located at 3000 Lee Highway. Mr. Steinhauser, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and nice to see everybody for the first time this year. Hi, Chris. Hi, Irving. How's it going? The subject property for this case is Lion Village Apartments. It's a garden style apartment community right off Lee Highway in the Lion Village area. My appeal materials start on page 34 of 78 of the assessor's BOE memo. So we'll give everyone a moment to flip to page 34, and then I'll get started. Current assessment, $21,317,500. Our asking value, $15,982,000. Everyone, I hope, take a close look at the pictures of the building. There's some more to come, but it's important to at least note, where the main entrance is, right there, sort of on the second level. So this building was built in 1940. There are 109 total units. We also used an income approach to value the property per the DREA's 2021 apartment guidelines. Our income approach is on page 39 of 78, and I'll be happy to walk you through that. You'll see our pro forma on the left, and then the county's original on the right. Should be noted that they have, adjusted that number slightly. But we still feel, even with the adjustments, that it's too high. So first and foremost, the assessor applies their standard 6% vacancy and collection loss for this building. The property was in fact 47% vacant as of the 1/1/21 date of value. This 70-year-old property had undergone, pretty major rehabilitation over the past 2 years, really in order to stay functional. So things like adding in-unit washer dryers, upgrading old appliances, and things of that nature. So the owner originally expected to receive, slightly elevated rents after the project was complete. However, as of 1/1/21, the current renting climate was really not what they expected it to be when they started the project, to say the least. Asking rents were down 15% year over year. And so the rents that they're getting for the newer units are almost in line with, what they had gotten before the renovation. We apply a 10% vacancy and collection loss above the line, which we think better reflects, market vacancy, which was close to 8%, and then an increased collection loss, as well as, concessions, which were up to 2 months on a 15-month lease. The assessor says that's accounted for in the vacancy and collection loss. Yet it's pretty clear that, concessions are not accounted for, within a 6% vacancy and collection loss. It doesn't really even account for market vacancy. We account for the remainder of the actual vacancy at the property through a below the line adjustment, which is what the assessor does for new buildings. So that's the first issue, the vacancy and collection loss highlighted there. It does appear the assessor lowered his rents. So, we didn't change the vacancy and collection loss, but lowered the rents, but you're kind of getting to the same place anyways. So, in that aspect, it's not as big of an issue. However, the second issue, which is a very big issue, is the classification of the property. All the way up until last year, this building was classified as a garden style apartment by the county. I don't know what changed. They didn't add a floor, or anything like that in the renovation, but now the assessor has changed the classification to a mid-rise. So thereby reducing the cap rate from what should be 6.4% loaded to 6.00%. This actually makes a huge difference on the value. And we think, frankly, that it's just uncalled for. Yes, the building is full, there's 3 separate buildings, and there are 4 floors. And I can see how if you're driving by on Lee Highway and you see it from the building from the back, you could think that it was 4 floors. But then when you're actually out on the inside of the courtyard and walking into the buildings, you walk right in on the second level, and the first level is below grade. So certainly we would think that would be considered a 3-story building. I mean, if Lion Village Apartments, if Lion Village isn't a garden style apartment complex, I'm not sure what is. So it is a little strange that after, 70 years or so, this is getting switched to mid-rise all of a sudden, but we certainly think the board should consider, keeping it as a garden style. The third and fourth appeal issues, we deducted a rent loss calculation below the line for 40%. This is the excess vacancy at the property. This is what, the lease up is going to be over the course of the year, hopefully, if they're able to lease it up. And then finally, the capital spend from 2020. Typically we would say that this amount should be deducted before it's spent. But what the county has said time and time again is that they're not going to do that. They will consider it after the monies have been spent. And in this case, they spent $1.8 million to, rehabilitate the property. And we're simply asking the county to apply the same logic that they have in similar cases. So though after those deductions, you can see our stabilized value was 18.6 million, and then after the two deductions, we're down to 15.9 million. And finally, just to sort of wrap up, the rest of our appeal package, there are additional photos on page 42 of 78. Which again, you can sort of see where the entrances are. There's three buildings. The top left is building B, and the top right is building C. None of these, the main entrances are not on, the ground level. It's one up. Page 43 is a detailed breakout of the capital spend. Page 44 and 45, the county guidelines, and this is just to show, what the cap rate should be for garden pre-1969 build, non-metro, 6.4%. Finally, just really a bunch of articles starting on page 46 from CoStar, specifically mentioning the downward change in rents in Arlington. Then we have an article actually from Arlington Now on page 50, and this quotes a report from apartmentlist.com, which even breaks into more detail on the downward decline of rents in Arlington, specifically as of January 1, 2021. So I'll let you all browse through that if you're interested, but otherwise just sort of tying it all back to, the county's test sheet, which I know we'll be looking at. The issues are the above the line vacancy and collection loss, the cap rate based on the classification of the property as a mid-rise instead of a garden, and then below the line adjustment for excess vacancy in the form of rent loss, and deducting the 2020 capital spend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Steinhauser. So we'll work backwards in a bit. Addressing the property classification first and foremost. As the board has seen before, specifically in regards to last year's classification of Columbia Park and some of the others that had historically been considered gardens, but upon visit switched to mid-rise. That's the same thing that occurred here. This is, I believe, the third year or fourth year the property has been appealed. We did go visit the property, and as Mr. Steinhauser noted, there is 4 floors above grade. We can get into semantic arguments about what topography means as far as above grade or below grade, but even in the pictures that Mr. Steinhauser notes, the pictures, building B, I'm not sure which, again, buildings he quoted, but the above right, below right, and lower left all show full 4 stories above grade. So even if you go in a door and it leads you upstairs, but then you have the option to go downstairs, that'd be like saying a split level doesn't have, the ability to go downstairs or livable space. As the pictures note, these are full-size windows. In effect, some of them have walkout doors to take advantage of the ability to go out at grade. In point of fact, if you go to CoStar, they'll list it as a mid-rise 4-story. And again, even in the appellant's own appeal packet on page 35, I believe it is, his own documents call it a building type mid-rise apartment, floors 4. So we're all in agreement that's 4 stories of a grade. If you go to Google Maps and go to Street View at the intersection of Kirkwood and Lee Highway, you'll see that there's 2 portions of the 2 buildings that are actually 5 stories. So really, there can be no question that this is a mid-rise building. That's sort of the crux of the argument in the sense of switching the cap rate. But that really is small in comparison to looking at the numbers as illustrated on the summary sheet. We're actually very much on par with each other, except for the below the line adjustments. If you look at the NOI, we're within $15,000 of each other, the appellant's column and ours. This again is in regards to the revision. As Mr. Steinhauser noted, the building is having trouble with vacancy. Now, you could claim that it was somewhat owner discretion as far as those years of huge renovations to multiple buildings, talking about upgrades to electrical to allow for washer dryers, bathrooms refitted, risers for plumbing, heating. So quite a bit of renovation. And that is one reason why we don't take off the below the line deduction for the capital spend. I don't expect you all to know, you hear quite a few cases as we do, but this has been, again, a chronic issue where Mr. Steiner is new to the case this year, but as previous representatives to the owner have done, is make below the line requests for capital improvements. This year it's 1.8 million. Last year is 1,058,000. 2 years ago is 1.6 million. We've established to the fact of the board, the idea of the capital improvements is to improve upon the property, the life of the property, or the ability to increase rents. We don't disagree with Mr. Steinhauser's contention that they have not been able to do that yet, but I would argue that they walked into COVID. In other words, when these were delivered, they were literally done last year at some point during the COVID season. So it's not quite I think, a good bellwether test to whether or not they're getting the return on investment for what they put into the property. I would also note, as the board is familiar with our effective age changes, that this property sits in 1950 age. So in a sense, we have not yet realized the changes that have been made to the property. And I know that's a subjective area of discussion, but I think we're all on the same page that there's no way that after the renovations of some $6 million, as reported by the owner of the last 3 years, this property is 70 plus years old. So a proper post-renovation inspection would be in place to determine the effective age and where that would sit. That would obviously also affect the potential affect the cap rate. Again, given that we don't make below the line adjustments for current year capital spend, and as Mr. Steiners noted, in regards to rent loss deductions below the line, it's really a slippery slope in the sense that, as he noted himself, that's for new construction. While this was renovated and rehabbed, in a sense, this was done at owner's discretion. This isn't something that was necessarily subject to market vacancy, and as compared to other properties. Excuse me. I know I'm not vaguely 100% familiar with all 600 properties that I am responsible for, but I've not seen anything near 36%, 40% vacancy. And so again, it's not to call in question the management of the property, but it's just, it's literal. Again, if you look at CoStar in the submarket, I think it's a full 20 or 30% below what's going on at this property. And in the market overall, it's a 6% vacancy. That's reported in by the industry, by the apartment owners themselves. So this property is underperforming in a big way. But again, we noted that in our revision. If you look at the GPI, it's a full almost $500,000 below what was achieved in year 17-18, before the renovations took place. So again, we've acknowledged that the rent potential has been squashed by, can't even do the math, but again, over $500,000 based off what was the stabilized potential in the years prior to the renovation. As Mr. Steiners have noted, we do use stabilized vacancy and concession, but our effective gross is actually below what Mr. Steinhauser and the owner believes can be achieved in 2021. Our operating expenses are very much on par, 35% of effective gross, very much on par with the reported historically, in fact, higher than years 17, 18, and 19, and 20. And again, our NOI is within $15,000 of the appellants. So we believe we've covered the classification of the property appropriately. Again, this is physically 4 stories above grade. As far as arguing over whether or not it should be, that is what it is. It's not a woe's me, but we're swamped. There's 3 appraisers for I don't know how many reviews and properties to touch. So it does sometimes take a while, but the important point is making sure that the record is accurate. It is a 4-story, it's a mid-rise. We valued it as such. We do believe that the revised value of $20,120,200 should be confirmed. That is a over $1 million reduction from last year. In fact, it's about 5.6% year over year. The appellant's numbers are almost 21% year over year. We believe that's just too aggressive a change in 1 year's time. So we do believe the revision of $20,120,200 should be confirmed. Anything to add, Irving?
No, I think you covered it up well.
All right, that is all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you. This is for the county. When the clarification was made as to mid-rise versus garden apartment, how was that done?
As far as,
I mean, was that just an internal definition, or was the public given notice, or?
No, there's no public notice given. It's just a matter of looking at periodicals, looking at some of the industry trade publications at CoStar, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. We've kind of covered some of the different things we've looked at.
So in your analysis of garden versus mid-rise, you know, the Ditmar people, that was kind of what generated this whole discussion and this whole effort. And on Ditmar, it went back and forth, but these folks had no clue it was coming. And when you look at the definition, do you look at all about whether one of the stories is a basement or not? Or is that just not relevant?
Yeah, and again, I think it's just a definition, or I don't know if semantics is the right word, but we kind of covered this in the sense that, as Mr. Steiners noted, technically you enter at a second level and you can go down, but those apartments on the first floor have the same exact size windows. They have points of egress. There's literally no difference. They don't get square footages difference. They don't have, you know, so if their rents are allocated differently, they'll be handled by the market. But there's literally no difference other than going downstairs as opposed to upstairs.
One thing to also point out that Chris mentioned in his opening remarks is that if you look at the building from the back, there's actually 5 stories on the building. So if you are on Kirkwood and Lee Highway, you'll see that there. I mean, you're not on Kirkwood, Grant. So if you go to Kirkwood, since you're sharing your screen, you can show what we're talking about. So
this
again,
is for the property owner. I have a question. How much parking? What's your parking ratio per unit?
I don't know the answer to that question.
And where is your parking?
It's on the side here, and then on the other side as well.
How far does one have to travel from their parking to get to their unit?
Well, I assume you just sort of walk right in the middle here, and then the entrances to the 3 buildings are all from the middle.
How many parking lots are there?
I'm not 100% sure. I think the bigger one is on the other side. This is
Okay.
small.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, can we remove the shared screen and then we'll move to other questions? Thank you. Any other questions from board members?
I apologize. I didn't think that was going to work. So then it actually shared, and I was like, oh, whoops.
Don't worry.
Sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to do that while you were
Don't
talking. I was going to talk about that, but sorry.
Okay, no other questions? All right.
Yeah,
Oh,
Just
sorry,
again,
Mr. Hoffman.
yeah, just kind of following up on Barnes's first question, just from the perspective of an investor or the market, somebody looking at this property and doing a valuation for a purchase, is there any value difference aside from the number of stories between this property and say Colonial Village or Fillmore Gardens, which are all classified as garden apartments, all built around the same period? If you're an investor, are you looking at one as inferior because of the number of stories, or basically you're treating them all the same?
Well, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Colonial Village is affordable. Not 100% sure, but even if it wasn't, again, we follow the market, if you will, Mr. Hoffman. So in other words, once sales come in of garden types, we look at garden cap rates. When sales of mid-rise comes in, we look at mid-rise cap rates. Mid-rise are even less popular, if you will, than gardens. So it's a matter of how many sales we get. We tend to get more high-rise sales, so they tend to be easier to delineate. But definitively, if there's a difference between gardens and mid-rise, we would note that in the marketplace. A lot of the garden sales we've been getting tend to be your Westover types, your smaller units, maybe 22 units or less, whereas this one I believe is 109, so it's a little bit larger. It's I don't know. I don't want to do run-on sentence, but I think if we saw a clear difference in the value based on the market sales, you'll see those in the cap rates that show up in what we use.
One thing to point out is, like we said, when you look at publications, I mean, they do stratify their information by property type. So they'll have mid-rise vacancies, mid-rise rents. This property would fall in mid-rise rents and mid-rise vacancies, since CoStar classifies it as mid-rise. We do the same. I think years ago, as Barnes alluded to, there was a disagreement in our property classification change of a property. They referenced, I think it's Freddie Mac or some other agency that looks into apartment appraisals, and they classify it by garden, mid-rise, high-rise. As you know, each classification has a cutoff point. The cutoff point is 4 stories, 8 stories for mid-rise. The garden was listed as 1 to 3 stories. So we're actually, as Chris said, following along market trends and treating these properties the same as the market treats them.
Okay.
Mary, this is Ken. I have a question.
Okay. Mr. Matzkin.
Thank you. This is for the appellant. I want to know more about the vacancies induced by rehabilitation. The write-up that Chris made talks about over a few years, there was a rotating forced vacancy to rehabilitate. Was it about 3 years-ish, meaning in 2020, vaguely a third were vacant because of rehabilitation?
Yeah, there are 3 buildings, and I believe they renovated one at a time. So that would be accurate. I mean, they're not all the exact same unit count. Like the back building is 47. The top left is 26, and the top right is 36. But essentially, yeah, they renovated one building.
Yeah, rounded off. About a third of the units were unavailable for lease because of rehabilitation. So I have a follow-up question for the department. This happens, of course, where there's, forced vacancy due to renovation. Is there not, refresh my memory, is there not some lease up deduction below the line afforded to landlords who for the good of the order created their own vacancy, or not?
No, yeah, so there was 2 different things. One has since ceased to exist, but there was a formal county subsidized, if you will, a rehab for tax exemption purposes for those owners that went through rehabilitation purposes. This wasn't one. This was one who basically just did it as they would say, to keep up with the Joneses or market, some of their market competitors. Again, this was built in 1940. So this was something that I know Mr. Steinhauser wouldn't necessarily be privy to, but the previous representative to the owner had said been somewhat going on since 2013 as units would turn, but was as a major rehab for the last 3 years, again with some $5 million spent in CapEx.
So that, just to be clear, sir, when they rehab their building and create their own vacancy problem, that's on them because that's just a business decision.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not said so harshly, but the idea is there should be a difference between market vacancy derived by marketplace considerations and those driven by management decision.
Okay, that's a clear delineation. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Panorama.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Chicas, this is, I just wanted to be clear. Was this property classified as a garden type property for the past years? And this is the first time that it's being classified as a mid-rise?
That's correct. Yeah, this was changed for January 1, 2021.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So,
Okay, any final? No? Okay, Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
absolutely. Just to again, trail on Mr. Miranda's point, again, this is something that we did realize upon inspection of property. Again, it's not to be cute about it, but in a sense, this was in favor to and heir to the owner for years. This is factually a 4 stories above grade building, and again, as we stressed to you, without being argumentative, Mr. Steinhauser, look at the property from Kirkwood and Lee Highway. You'll see at least 5 stories on 2. There you are, 5 stories on 2 different portions of the property. So even if you were to say that it varies from what it looks like 3 stories above grade to this 5 stories, this would be a 4-story property, 4-story mid-rise classification. Again, in regards to the property's summary sheet, we're very much in line with the appellant's recommendation within $15,000 of the NOI. Difference, of course, is the 40 basis points, but we account for that in the property type classification. We do not make below the line adjustments for capital X, and we do not make below the line adjustments for those properties that are new for lease up deductions. So we ask that you stay consistent while we evaluate the other property types like this and confirm the revision of $20,120,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Steinhauser, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yeah, thanks. I think if the entire building looked like, what Mr. Chicas just showed, I would 100% be in agreement with him. But the fact is, the rear building abuts a hill and it's very clearly only 1 story at grade and 2 above grade. It's only 3. I again would assume that 100% of, the units and buildings needed to be at or above grade to qualify as a mid-rise. And this certainly is not that. There's no elevators. This is a garden, low-rise community. So we hope the board considers that. There's also been some terms sort of thrown out there, like owner-induced vacancy, and it was a business decision. It's not like they took a Class B building and renovated it to a trophy because they're trying to double their rents. We're talking about a 70-year-old building that they're simply upgraded the appliances and did a bunch of electrical and plumbing work. You're really just maintaining the functionality of the building. So it definitely seems harsh to say, oh, well, that was their choice. We're not going to make any sort of, additional vacancy deduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members. What's everybody think? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll go ahead and share my thoughts. It's a 70-year-old project. If I'd been the owners, I probably would not have renovated and held out and see what the Lee Highway study brings. That would have been my choice, but they made the decision to go ahead and renovate. On this amount of stories, the county did clarify for the future, mid-rise vis-a-vis garden. But I want to remind my colleagues that that's a policy. It's not law. It's not an ordinance. When you create law, people that are impacted by it have a right to participate, comment on it, and so forth. And so the definition of mid-rise vis-a-vis garden is the county's policy. It's not law. And this particular project has some real challenges. I had family members that lived here for quite a few years, and the parking is dreadful. There's 3 different parking lots. The majority of the parking is actually across the street behind the project. And so I think when you're not near the metro and you don't have adequate parking, I think it's going to be a challenge to lease this. And the Ditmar projects that we acquiesced in the new definition that they're mid-rise, my recollection is those had elevators. And this one, you're going to either walk up or down. There's no elevator. And so I just think this property has a lot of challenges. I personally would take the applicant's pro forma, take the NOI and apply the 6.4% cap rate, end up at 18,624,500. That's my analysis of it, and I'll see if anyone shares that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Huffman.
Yeah, Barnes, I had the exact same conclusion. But going from there, you mentioned the Lee Highway plan. This site's marked as a significant cultural resource, which from an investment standpoint is a negative. It means that you'll never be able to raise it. It means that you'll never be able to significantly rehab the exterior of the building, and you'll never be able to raise rents significantly. Or at least the county wouldn't support any kind of rezoning or change that would allow that. So I look at it kind of like the Fillmore Gardens, the other properties that are around the county that are 1950s, 1940s build. And I just don't see from equalization standpoint why this should be treated as a more attractive investment with a lower cap rate than any of those other properties. And on that line, I also feel just the history of classifying it as a garden from year to year to year and then making the change is probably not something we want to do. So that's just how I feel.
All right, I guess because, well, you've covered a lot of ground there between the two of you, but I mean, from a standpoint of the classification, we asked as a board, I mean, it was partly because of us, requiring them to come out with an actual definition of these types of properties, and they did. So, it's not like this was blindsided. I mean, we as a board asked them to do it, and they did it. From a standpoint of, it's a policy, it's an acceptable appraisal practice. I mean, it doesn't need to be vetted by, the public. It's not law, and I don't think the county is trying to come out and say that it's law, but they have a classification. They have to be able to equalize assessments across different types of properties. I mean, my concern initially was when I looked at this and, the part that's below grade, if this was one building and there was, 3 stories and only 1 story partially below grade, I think we'd have an argument, but you've got multiple buildings, you've got 4 stories, you've got 5 stories and some, I feel comfortable that this is a mid-rise. There's always going to be gray, when you're talking about 1 to 3, it has nothing to do with whether there's an elevator or not. 4 to 8, people want to argue, well, it's 9, so it's very close to a mid-rise. It's styled more like a mid-rise. You got to make the delineation somewhere. So I'm okay with that portion. From a standpoint of the issue brought up on the parking, a lot of these projects have the same issue, that there's parking either across the street or in other, locations to the building. It's, some have assigned parking, some have first come, first serve, some has street parking. That's all included in the rents. I mean, if it was assigned parking, they would be able to collect, more in rents for that. So, I don't have an issue with either the parking or the actual determination of what the property is. So I don't know, what does everybody else think? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said, Mary. I was, when I drove by, yeah, definitely look like a building that if I were going to list this as a condominium unit being put for sale, it would have been a little bit challenging, I guess, to put it as a garden type apartment or not. Some parts in Fairfax, there are buildings that are similar, but the difference I think in this case is that, like you said, you know, there's part of the property has buildings that are more than 4-story in height. And I think that makes a difference as far as the classification for me. I don't really see how we can make any other changes. I think the revised assessment is more, I mean, it's very reasonable compared to all the numbers from the past. So I'm okay with it. I don't, you know, it would have been, if it didn't have the extra story in the building like Mr. Chick has shown, and I think I would have been probably more inclined to maybe put it as a garden type, but yeah, I'm okay with it.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Yates?
I think you said it very well, Mary, and I looked at it too, and it is not a garden apartment. And I recognize there are not elevators or anything else, which have been points of discussion. It is an older property, but these are not reasons for the adjustment. I think we're good with the revised numbers.
Okay. Mr. Matskin, I can't see you. Did you have any comment?
No, I agree. I agree with what's said, and nobody's mentioned that even in the apparently 3-story building, there is a lower level that is tenanted, which still makes it 3+1.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on board with the last several comments.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Hoffman? Yes, sir.
I just want 2 more comments, but I think we're probably ready for a motion after this. The rents fall directly on the table for the garden 1 to 3-story properties, and actually do not get high enough to reach the mid-rise properties on the county zone guidelines. So that's a fact. And the other comment I have is the county referenced apartment investment cap rate studies, and the studies I have here all lump apartments into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. They're not divided by garden or number of stories. It's usually tier 3 older properties with functional inadequacies and or marginal locations. Tier 2 would be aging former first tier properties in good to average locations, and tier 1 would be new to newer quality construction in prime to good locations. So that's usually not as clearly defined as a number of stories.
No, and I mean, that latter point is a good one, I think, Mr. Hoffman. I mean, and if the county wants to, you know, change their assessment strategy across the board to use that, that might be a better way, but I don't feel comfortable pulling one property out and saying, well, we'll assess this one this way. You know, from a standpoint of equalization. I mean, it's something that's probably something the county should look at for the future.
It would be good to think about for next year or year after.
Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I think those points are well taken, Greg, and the same with the points that, you know, Barnes, you're bringing up. I think they're very valid, but I think, you know, the rents that they get are reflective of all the issues that they have, parking and all that stuff. So, you know, I think, yeah, it's a challenge, but I think the rent rates that they get are pretty much reflective of that.
Mm-hmm.
And those rent rates reflect in the income, and that goes to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right, and the county comes up with those guidelines based on the range of what these properties report. So, you know, to your point, Mr. Hoffman, it's at the lower end. You know, that's what's setting those, you know, mid-rise rates. But all right, well, without further discussion, I'm going to move to accept the county's revised number of $20,120,200.
Okay.
Okay, and Ms. Hogan is the second. All in favor?
Aye. Can I?
Opposed? Okay, so that it's 5-2 without Greg and Mr. Lawson. The county's revised number is confirmed of $20,120,200. Thank you, Mr. Steinhauser and Mr. Chiefus.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, I saw Mr. Bailey. Do we have Mr. Gilstein? Rosa?
I had sent you an email about Mr. Leinstein yesterday, where he signed the reduction.
Oh, no, I didn't get that one.
I didn't see
Yes.
that.
Okay,
Yes.
so he accepted the counties?
He did. He accepted it, so he wasn't going to be online.
Oh, okay, I did not see that. I always read those. Okay,
Yes,
so
it was late. I
because
think
it
it was
was at
late
the
afternoon.
11th hour then, I will move to accept the withdrawal from the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, and Ms. Hogan again. Boy, we are the Mary and Mary team here. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Can I?
Okay, that's unanimous. That's accepted. Okay,
I'm sorry, Mary, can I,
Sure.
was this a withdrawal request or are we just reducing to what the
no,
county?
he accepted it, so we're just taking the withdrawal since it was already done outside.
Okay,
Okay, so we have Mr. Bailey. I saw earlier Mr. Conklin. Okay. All right, Mr. Conklin. So the next case on the agenda is RPC 18003-602. Property is located at 1320 North Beach Street. And Mr. David Conklin is here to talk about the property. Mr. Conklin, you can take your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure everybody could hear me.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Good to see everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. As Ms. Dooley said, the property located at 1320 North Village Street, it is a 564 unit multifamily property with a small amount of retail at 2,400 square feet. It's about 18 stories. It's a high rise built in 1997. The 2020 assessment was about 237 million. The revised value that the county has proposed is 240,607,800,000. We are requesting an assessment of $200,289,000 even. I'll walk through our income approach and just highlight the differences. The main differences really are the rents utilized by the county, the vacancy by the county, a little difference in expenses. We do have the same cap rate, so there's no argument there. So obviously, as everybody knows, Arlington rents are down significantly on the multifamily side, especially in urban settings, especially around mass transit settings. It's not just Arlington County. It's across major urban centers across the country. Obviously, the pandemic has had a big impact on the multifamily space. People are moving out. People are moving to the suburbs. People are buying homes. I don't think that's a foreign concept to anybody on this call. So in our income approach, we took a look at the actual rents being signed in the second half of 2020. We have an average rent per unit of 2,046 per unit. The county is using 2293 if I did my math correctly. It's a pretty significant difference. Again, these are the most recently signed leases in the second half of 2020, when obviously investors are going to take a peek at that. So if you look at it from the difference as of 1/1/20, we had an average lease rent of 2,337. As of the second half, as I stated, it's down to 2,046 per unit. The 1/1/21 lease rents are approximately 2,230. Those are carrying forward some older leases, but we took a look at what the market was actually bearing as of 1/1/20, the date of value. So that's obviously the major difference. I think that the county obviously has addressed that to some degree. I don't think to the extent necessary. It's basically a 12.5% decline. If you look at what was in place as a 1/1/20 as opposed to what we were actually getting in the second half of 2020 or the most recently signed leases, and in our opinion the market rate for current space in courthouse. Again, it's mass transit areas, it's urban settings that are really getting hammered, and lifestyles are changing. People don't want to be in mass areas, and it's bearing out in the rents. Moving further, we took an 8% vacancy and collection loss. We have a significant amount. I shouldn't say significant amount, but higher than normal, obviously. As a company, I'll just share, we own about 300 apartments across the country. We're carrying as a company $50 million in bad debt, as people are either not required to pay or they are just not paying their rents. So we took the actual vacancy at the property as of the first of the year was about 7.25, and then we did add some vacancy. Obviously, on a stabilized basis, we know that it'll be a little bit higher, hopefully, but we did take a higher vacancy and collection loss due to the challenges any investor would have to assume as of the first of the year. And obviously, real estate is a speculative game, so they're going to have to make assumptions moving forward. Expenses we utilized were about 3.3 million and change versus the 3.215. It's a little bit higher than our actuals from 2020. Obviously, expenses grow. Any investor would take that into consideration. In addition, as a company, we're a fairly large player in the space. We operate with economies of scale. One of the items we do is we self-insure. It drops our insurance cost. We have a captive insurance plan. So our insurance costs are typically half of what a normal owner would incur. There's a laundry list of other items that we do as a company, but since expenses are relatively not a major issue at this point, I won't belabor that issue. So our derived NOI is $10,651,000 as opposed to the county's revised $12.819 million. The county seems to be just taking a looked at what occurred in 2020. If you look at what their NOI is kind of in line with what happened, in 2020. Unfortunately, as of the first of the year, that's not what's occurring. These rents are going to be in place, for a long time. Our budgeted NOI for 2021 was about like 11.5. So it is a little bit higher. But again, the difference being we're looking at market rents as opposed to, every lease that's in place. So that's the difference between the budgeted 11.5 and our 10.61. So again, I think the county just, if you look at this from a standpoint of just a valuation, we're at 237 last year on the assessment. Rents are down 12.5, and we're getting an assessment increase. It doesn't really make any sense from a valuation perspective, assuming that value was correct. We did not appeal it, but I think if we're looking at it, holistically, the 12.5% decline in rents certainly doesn't warrant an assessment increase or a value increase. From an overall valuation standpoint on an income approach, we're not going to get $12.81 million, and it's going to take a long time to get that back. Even if we are starting to raise rents, at some point in 2021. So again, we'd like this addressed, and we're requesting, it's obviously a significant change, but if you look at the 12.5% on a $240 million valuation, it's pretty substantial. So I don't have anything else at the time. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bailey for the county.
Good morning, board. This property is Avalon Courthouse. It sits directly behind our office building, which is about a 2-minute walk to the courthouse metro station. You can access the metro station by walking up the hill, going through the county's garage to that access point, or you can walk up to the actual plaza and go down the escalator to access the metro station. So this property is very close to the metro station. It has actually performed well over the years. As Mr. Conklin stated, they did not appeal the assessment in 2020, and they haven't actually appealed this assessment in at least the last 5 or 6 years because our audit log doesn't report any review cases from this property. As you can see by the summary sheet on page 3, in 2017, they reported 2 I&E statements, but starting in 2018, continuing on to 2020, they report all of their income and expense information on one document. When you look at the property, you can see that from 17 to 18, there was about a $500,000 increase in NOI, and then from 18 to 19, there was about a $200,000 increase in NOI. There was a significant drop in 2020, which you expect, decreasing by about $500,000, still above the 2017 reported numbers. We looked at the information provided and made adjustments to the rent based off of what was submitted on the I&E form. Our apartment rent was reduced by about $300,000. The retail space reported significant decreases in NOI. I think they restructured the lease agreement with that tenant, and so we made adjustments to that area as well. The vacancy we used is 5% based on guidelines, as you can see by the 2020 numbers. They reported 7%, which isn't too far off from the actual guideline numbers. And if you look at the past years, they've actually performed better as far as vacancy and collection than our guideline numbers. Expenses are in line with what they reported. You can see that they had slight increases over the years. From 2019 to 2020, there was a small increase. The test expenses are actually right in line with what they reported, but slightly higher. This resulted in a reduction because we dropped our NOI by about $500,000 from the original assessment to the test. Is slightly higher than what we used for the 2020 assessment of this property. And based off of that, we offered a reduction of $240,607,800. That's pretty much all we have for this case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Questions from the board members? Mr. Yates.
Would the appellant comment on, I understand the rent or the vacancy issue. As far as concessions, what are you doing with concessions? Did you touch on that?
Now, as of now, or as of the first of the year, anytime during 2020, what period?
Just speak on them, please.
Yeah, sure. During the middle of the pandemic, I'd say in the middle of the year, most of the space, I wouldn't say all of them, we were offering a month or two. Those started to burn off.
Okay.
In terms of a burn off, I should say the offer burned away. Currently, there's no offer of concessions in the market at the property today. I don't have an exact date of when we pulled that. My sense would be it would have been likely in the after the first of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, and that those any concessions. I think in 2020 it was like 283,000 as a total, and most of that obviously would be after the pandemic began. There was nothing beforehand, so it's the face rents that we've declined in a lot of places. Obviously, you can call it what you want, but those are declined rents. That's what a concession is anyway, right?
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
This is Ken. I have
Mr. Metzgen.
So, for the appellant, just on that topic, you had mentioned that, of course, a lot of rents at a higher level signed in 2020 or 2019 carried over to 2021. But at the end of 2020, in the pandemic, the rent structure went down. This figure you have for apartments in column G, is that a blend of older, higher rents and newer, lower rents?
I'm sorry, I don't have the printout in front of me. We had an issue with our security from the Dropbox, but if you're referring to our income approach, is this on the county's test page?
Yes, this is the appellant's pro forma for 2021.
Of 13,853, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is we based it on the second half of 2020 market leases. So anything transacted in the second half of 2020. We looked at that, because we're valuing the property as of 1/1 on a fair market fee simple approach, right? So market rents, vacancy block, et cetera, et cetera. I agree. I'll say it's probably a little bit of a bit aggressive due to the fact that apartments are a little bit different than office or retail in terms of the number of in place leases that might carry over. Obviously, turnover is greater.
Okay, I think you've answered the question. I'm going to move on to the next question.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead. I'll just say one other.
The other question you had was RUBS, where pass-throughs, where some years report them, some years you don't report them. What is the policy on that? Why do I see it sporadic? Because that's a big number, at least certainly in your estimate for 2021. Or is this
I don't know if we
2020?
If we didn't, I don't know if we didn't report them. I have on our historical NOI that they're all in there in terms of on an I&E. So you have different accounting. It's really an accounting practice. So if we don't have them included above the line, I should say in the revenue, our RUBS would be a deduction on our utility costs for the most part. So if they're not, again, as I said, the historical income and expense comparison that we have in the packet, kind of it shows our miscellaneous, it's 896, 906, and 817. So again, if it's not in there, it's a reduction to utilities. And we try to be consistent, and sometimes, quite frankly, when we report, it might not be, but it might not be a revenue, it might be an offset to expense. So that would be the difference. But in terms of the overall number in the last, 3 years, it's 896,906 and 897 for that miscellaneous. And I think what would we have? We had 850 in there, and then 530 for parking. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the answer. We also do, again, it's just our accounting practices that we've employed. It's not,
okay.
It would just be a transfer from our internal income and expense documents.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions, Mr. Metzgen?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda.
I'm sorry. This is for Mr. Bailey. The question I had is as far as the classification of the units. I noticed that you don't have anything as an efficiency or a studio, even though the building has units that are, there are plenty of units there that are studios. Is it because the owner classifies them as just 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms? On page 36, they give a count of the units that they have. I think they have, just 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, they only reported 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom. That's what we went off of. And I actually inspected the property, and I only saw 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom units.
Okay.
Yeah, there's actually, and I think Irving addressed this when we talked about it when not too long ago. But there's 12 one bedrooms and 2-bedroom and 7 2-bedrooms that are a little bit different than the standard
Right.
1-bed and 2-bed. But there's not a quote unquote studio that in the property.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw some floor plan advertised on the website, but okay, that's fine. Thank you.
It's minimal if it is.
Okay.
If you look.
Okay,
Oh,
you've
sorry.
answered the question. In fact, the question
Thank
wasn't
you.
addressed to you. Any questions from any other board members? No? Mr. Bailey, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
As I stated, I inspected this property and was able to do a self-guided tour. They renovated a few units, but there weren't really major renovations. The main renovation to the property was to the package and locker areas, the package room, the fitness center, the residence lounge, where they created like 2 telework rooms. So that was notes that I made. Aside from that, we did make adjustments to the apartment rent based off the 2020 INE. We actually did stratify out the different types of 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms to account for the difference in rent for those units. That's one way we got a lower apartment revenue. Aside from that, we made an offer to reduce the assessment down to 246,07, 800. When you look at the NOI on the test compared to the NOI for 2020 and even the history of the property, we believe that that's a reasonable NOI for our revision. We ask that the board accepts this offer proposed by the department, and that is all I have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Conklin, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Sure, thank you, and sorry for answering the question before. Again, I appreciate the county's adjusting the rents. I just don't think they adjusted it far enough. As I've stated, as of the first of the back half of 2020, our rents declined 12.5% to $20.46 a unit. If you look at the 1/1/21 lease rents and encompassing every lease in the property, old ones 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever you want to look at, and current ones, it's $2,230. The county's at $2,300. The rents just aren't there. They're not coming back for some time. Certainly as of the first of the year, these things are going to carry over. And if people are staying in place, then we'll be limited in terms of what we can achieve at this property. As I stated, the budget for the year and not to go over 2021 numbers is pretty much in line to what I stated, about $11.5 million in NOI. The rents just don't support the current assessment. There's no way a 12.5% decline in rents warrants an assessment increase. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. All right, it's just among the board members. Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've been doing this for a few years, and I feel like I finally can analyze this as competently as Jose and yourself. And so what I do, I look at the county numbers and I look at the appellant's numbers, and then I check myself. And the check that I do is I go to, how did it actually perform? And, I've argued in some cases that the actual should lead to a decrease. But I think in this case, the actual is almost exactly the same as the county's test. And I think as far as the applicant, stating that, this is going to be a long-term thing, that's not what I'm seeing out there in the market. What I'm seeing is that we did have a decline, but it's come back strong. And Arlington is the place people are moving to, not moving away from. We do have an awful lot of units up in Boston, but in Courthouse, it's pretty stable. So I'm good with where the county is.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll be honest, when I look at this, I'm not sure why we're hearing this case. Because when I look at the test column, it's right within what the building reported. for 2020. And, to be $2 million less in a projection, I just don't think the appellant made a case to do that. So I'm fine with the county test. Mr. Yates?
Yeah, I understand their number and lowering rents versus concessions as in the past, or doing other things. I think the rubs, other and miscellaneous all balance out to the same number at the end of the day across the board. Expenses, I don't see that the county is not in line with where they should be on this. Everything seems to flow right, and I think the appellant's a little aggressive on it, on what they're projecting.
Yeah, agree.
And
All
this
right.
is Keen. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Hoffman.
The only thing that just seemed strange to me was that the NOI was higher in 19 and it was a lower assessment than this year. So I'm not sure what changed or what was, maybe there was a different cap rate back then or something, but it just seems weird. I feel the same way as you all on this year's assessment, but it does jump out as why in 19, if the NOI was 13.4 million, how is it worth more than the assessment this year at 12.8? So that's the only thing that doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more a question about last year and how that number was derived.
That's right. And unfortunately, we can't address
Yeah.
Value. Mr. Lawson.
Perhaps that could be general appreciation in values.
Okay. Mr. Penaranda, you had your hand up?
Well, the only thing I wanted to mention is, like I was asking Mr. Bailey, the classification of units may not be totally accurate, but, we don't have any other numbers to say how many studios, how many one bedrooms plus are. But, since the owners really classifying them as one bedroom and two bedrooms, I'm okay with it. There would be in my opinion, there would have been a slight difference, but I'm okay with the revised.
Okay, Mr. Metzgen.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that I took the 12.5% rent decrease seriously, and then thought about it a bunch, and realized, of course, that we're a committee of trends, and we don't whipsaw from year to year based on success or failure from any particular year. And the county has honored the trend and trended down the apartment income to an extent, knowing that if this landlord gets very, very well this year, they won't go up 12.5% or whatever the percentage is. So I like this, the way it was done in the revision.
Okay. All right. Well, then with no further discussion, I'll move to accept the county's revised number of 240,607.8.
Second.
Mr. Lawson has a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. The county's revised number 240,607,800 is confirmed. Thank you, Mr. Conklin. And Mr.
Thanks, everybody. Hope everybody stays well.
Okay, thank you. You too. Rosa, I see Mr. Awadala in the lobby.
Apparently, I've admitted him since the meeting started, and
I'm actually on. I'm on her phone. It won't let me
times,
sign up on computer.
Okay, Rosa, he's on. I was just going to say if we could get a hold of him too.
Yeah, he was on.
So he's on just by audio.
I'm on. Yeah, unfortunately, it just won't connect for me for whatever reason. So I do apologize. I'm sure it's something on my end.
Okay.
So, but I was able to collect. Get on for audio.
Okay, thank you. All right, so having voted on the prevailing side of this next case on August 17th, I'm going to move to recall it and reconsider. Mr. Awadala was trying to get into the meeting on the 17th and wasn't able to speak, so we're going to rehear this case. Do I have a second to recall it? Okay, Mr. Lawson, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so the motion carries to bring it forward. Okay, so calling the last case on the agenda. It's RPC 09070003. Property is located at 5714 11th Street North. Mr. Awadala, you have 8 minutes to tell us about this property, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I really do appreciate everybody's opportunity, giving us a second opportunity here to rehear this. I guess ultimately we're just trying to come to some sort of conclusion on our building as far as the taxes are concerned. I purchased the building 2 years ago, and we did have an appraisal, a professional appraisal on it. You know, and I believe that came in at 1.5. The current condition, unfortunately, is still in the condition of what we purchased it in. Due to COVID, we haven't really been able to, well, I guess the biggest thing is because the rent rolls are so low, people want to stay, and giving people the options of moving so we can renovate is not really an option for us because number one, the rents are low, and number two, no one's really moving because of COVID. Eviction obviously is not an option. So we're kind of stuck with the low rents. We're stuck with the condition of the building. And ultimately, based on condition, low rents, we don't understand why the assessment keeps going up. So we tried to contest it last year, and with COVID, there was a lot of confusion, and it never went through. Now we've started the process again. We originally started with Chris, and you know, sent Chris all the comps, all the supporting documents, and then the county, I guess, is very overwhelmed, so it ended up going to Lori, and we tried. You know, unfortunately, it was kind of like a rush process because we're also trying to understand the process. This is new to me. You know, it sounds like everybody's dealing with multi-million-dollar properties, where ours is, you know, 1.5, 1.8. So, but ultimately, we're looking at the neighboring properties that have same square footage, according to what I see, same unit count, and you know, their buildings are assessed at 1.4, 1.3, 1.4. You know, across the line, there's 5, 6 comps. So ultimately, our concern is obviously we've got a building that's run down, and the taxes keep going up, and the neighboring properties seem to support something more in line where we think we should be. I think our original appeal, we kind of based it on the condition, and it was 1.1, but obviously doing more due diligence, trying to kind of figure out where the process goes to get a proper assessment. We've obviously educated ourselves, and it's more of a per unit. I felt when I spoke to our appraiser, there was a 3-step process. There was a cap rate, a condition, and sales, but I feel like everything was kind of thrown out the window, and we're strictly just kind of going off of comps, of most recent comps. And I think for us, it obviously affects us in a negative manner because we're going off comps. You know, I'm very familiar with the neighborhood now. We're going off comps, $100 per door, $180 per door. These buildings are completely renovated. They've got central AC, central heat. The meters are separate. You know, you've got walls that are knocked down. You've got, you know, new windows, all new piping, new kitchen, new bathrooms. Where this building, for years and years, I mean, we've got pictures, but this is one boiler that's hooked up to the entire building. You know, we still have the original window units. We've got original floors, the original plaster, all original electric. So, you know, the confusion on our end is the formula that gives us the final assessment is, in our opinion, kind of skewed because now we kind of threw everything out the window, and we're just going off of comps. And based on the comps, if you know, how do we compare our unit, our building that's pretty run down to something that's tip-top shape that's also collecting tip-top rent? So, you know, in conclusion, we were hoping to come to some kind of middle ground with all this, but obviously we are where we are, and so hopefully we can come to some kind of solution today, or some kind of guidance.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Roskin for the county, please.
Thank you, board members. I want to say that first of all, I had no idea that Mr. Avadala had an appraisal. This is the first that I've heard of it. If I had known, I would have requested it. So on that note, moving on, he did express that his big concern was, were we equalizing his properties with others in that neighborhood? And one of the things that I did, I was like, okay, let me check, let me take a look. So I looked in several blocks in that entire neighborhood, and I researched roughly 47 properties. A couple of them are economic units, so I'm counting parcels. And I looked and I go, yes, okay, we are equitably assessing his property with other garden types like his. And he did mention, he gave me 2 comparables in the packet, and I looked those up. And it turns out both of those comparables are part of economic units, and they're part of the, let me make sure I'm using the right term, they're part of the affordable housing. And I tried to explain to him that these particular properties have restrictions. They're actually recorded restrictions on those properties. And they have specific stringent guidelines that they have to go follow through, and in order for updating and the kind of rents that they can charge to tenants. And so, yes, in that case, their price per unit is lower than his, but that's because they're restricted. When I talked to the owner, he did have a couple of residents. In fact, in this particular property, he has one resident that is a HUD resident who pays with a check, coupon check, whatever you want to call that. However, Mr. Awadala is not restricted. He can change his rents. He's not as restricted as these other particular properties that he used as comparables, and I tried to explain that to him. Well, what I did do is I provided a summary page for you, and we looked at his rents. However, we used the market approach, and I gave a list of 3 sales in the packet, and in Westover. And those sales were showing $195,000 per unit. Another one at $221,000 per unit, and the third sale was $181,000 per unit. And I looked those up. I researched the permits. I looked in CoStar, and there was no permits for remodel before the sale, okay? Only one of them, and it had it was a minor permit for something, fire retardant, I think it was. Other than that, none of those had taken out permits to remodel the projects. And like I said, I researched through CoStar, and there was no discussion of renovation prior to that sale. So we feel that these the sales that I included in the packet are very representative of this particular property. On the summary, I wanted to make note that we had it on record as having 10 units and 10 one-bedroom units. And during the inspection and also confirmation through phone call, they actually have 9 one-bedroom units and 2 efficiencies. So when I created a test column F, I showed, based on that correction, what the value should have been, which is $1,916,000. However, our current assessment is $1,800,000. And I am, if Irving wants to speak on anything, he's welcome to. Otherwise, I'm finished.
I think one of the comps that Laura is referring to is Fisher House, which is owned by Apple in this area. Apple bought the property. When they bought the property was not had not been renovated. It's because of the tax credits they received in the program they're a part of that they had to do renovations to this property. After the renovations, we took in consideration what they did to the property and increased the effective age based off of that work. But as you know, it is 100% committed affordable. There's a restricted covenant in place for at least 60 years, I believe, that essentially Apple has no control over their rent because they have to abide by those limits. That's a difference that Lori's pointed out between that property, which was used as a comp, and the subject property. But again, other than the CAF guidelines, as far as whatever work is done to that property, we treated that property the same as we would treat a market property. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, any questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
So I guess how does the county view the $1.5 million recorded sale from the end of 2018 as far as, was that an arm's length market transaction and property values have increased by 20% since then? Is that your opinion?
So, well, first of all, I'm looking at the sale. I'm going, well, maybe he got a pretty good deal on that property, because I'm showing other sales at much higher price per square foot. And I was trying to stay within the Westover. Okay, I was not looking at stuff that's over in Lion Village. I threw those out. But just looking at the Westover recent sales, it's possible that he got a pretty good deal on this property.
And that property was not the only sale that occurred in Westover during that time period. So we looked at this sale, but also took into consideration other Westover properties that sold during 2018. Those should be some of the comps that Lori used. If I can get to the guidelines, I can actually provide you with more Westover properties. Yeah, so he purchased, what was it? November 19, 2018 for 1.5 million. As Laura stated, our records indicated that it was 10 units. So we had a sales price per unit of 150,000. But December 28, 2018, there was a sale for 1.48 million, 8 units. So that's 185,000 per unit. It was a 1940 built, 1950 effective age property, just like the subject. Another property, 1100 North Kenilworth, December 28, 2018, sold for 1.3 million. The number of units we had on record was 7 units. So that's $185,714 per unit. Year built was 1941, effective age 1950, similar to the subject property. And so those were also sales that we looked at when we did our analysis for this particular property type. And based off of these sales and seeing the upward trend in price per unit from 2017 to 2018 and further in 2019, we made adjustments to that price per unit number. I don't think we increased the price per unit for 2021. I think that actual increase was done for 2020 or maybe even 2019. So the number that we're using to value this garden property is actually the same as what we would use last year. So there was no increase in that, even though we're seeing higher sales. That's all.
I could comment to that if that's okay.
Mr. Hoffman.
Actually, I was just to follow up on that, Irving. So what's the cap rate used at the Fisher House? Is that 690? Because it's on the CAF table.
I have to pull that up because again, after they did the renovations, their effective age increased.
Okay.
So I have to see what the.
But it's probably somewhere between 640 and 690. 690 would be the Affordable Gardens 1969 and earlier.
Yes, it looks like 690.
Yes, it's between 6.4 and 6.9. It's probably closer to
Yeah, I mean, there's the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, other questions?
This is Ken. I have two questions.
Mr. Matskin, go ahead.
Thank you. First, for the appellant, you had mentioned that this is not a competitive, particularly competitive garden apartment in the Westover neighborhood, and be tough to change rents. But I believe it's your reporting 2019 versus 2020. The total rents went up almost 24%. Can you comment on that, or did I miss something in your original statement?
Are you talking to me, sir? I'm sorry, it broke up.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, that's when we were able, I think we were able to get, with COVID, we had a vacancy. I think I have actually on the phone. I don't have it in front of me, but there was definitely some renovations that were done, and then there was a slight increase in rents that was able to, and I think a big portion was when we bought the building, there was vacancies as well. So that was the biggest jump. I believe there was 2.
Good one. I see that on the INE, on the department's INE. Okay, thank you. So second question
and
is.
And then we had, okay, sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think you've explained it. So my second question is for the department. Your original assessment, again, was based on 10 one-bedrooms, and then you revised in your test for 9 one-bedrooms and 2 efficiencies. So, of course, the rent should go up a bit, but it's going up 23% from the appellant's reporting of true reporting in 2020 of 9 one-bedrooms plus 2. How do you justify 23? The appellant seems to me have described why the income went up so much from 19 to 20, but I don't understand in your test why it would go up from 20 to 21 so much.
So, when sorry, I'm trying to switch to the guidelines here, the apartment guidelines. When I did the test, I just took the lowest rent for the efficiencies and the one-bedroom, through the guidelines. And I just tested the lowest possible rent, that's all, just to see what it would test out at, just to see a comparison. But as I said, we used the market approach of 180,000 per unit, and I think it's 148,000 per efficiency. And that's what you see, column F, all the way at the bottom at 1,916,000 for a test.
So,
based on the
guidelines,
9 one-bedroom.
I'm sorry, I understood you. So you use guidelines for properties like this versus the true rent rates that were achieved.
Yeah, because it's labeled test. Okay, so I was testing it to see what is going on here based on our guidelines. I tested it. I go, all right, let me use the lowest rents that we show in our guidelines. And I tested that out. And however, we did not use the income approach. We're using, for the garden apartments, we're using the market approach, which is based on sales. So I was trying to show all those tests is the point in that column.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
For the county, on your guidelines, you have a value for types of apartment units. Do you distinguish between grandfathered and non-grandfathered apartment projects?
No.
I'll let Irving. Okay.
No.
Okay, any final questions? No? Ms. Ruskin, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Thank you. Once again, I actually went out and inspected this property, walked in a couple of units with the owner, and we will make a correction to the number of units for next year going forward. However, I am, based on the market approach and the sales that I've shown, and also the additional sales that are listed in the guidelines in the Westover area, I'm asking you to confirm the assessment, the January 1 assessment at 1.8 million. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Awadala, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, I will. I guess Lori, unfortunately, we did get, and I apologize, maybe it's my fault. I just assumed when you took over the package that you saw the original appraisal that was handed over to Chris. And as far as the comps next door, the ones that are restricted to rents, believe it or not, those rents actually, they get higher rents than we do on the open market. I think they're voucher rents or whatnot. I'm not really sure. So if you take that in consideration, I mean, they're actually doing pretty well. And then, ultimately, when we started the appeal process, I thought we were going to take like 3 processes and then come up with a price. And it just feels like the county just kind of took what was beneficial to them and said, okay, we're not going to look at what you're making. We're not going to look at the true condition. We're just going to look at sales. And this is what we're going to, and because you have this many units, this is what we're going to do. I actually walked the 4 buildings that were in the original comps that unfortunately Lori didn't get, but I thought Chris had, that have the same square footage on 4 different buildings on 10th Street, and they're all assessed at 1.4, give or take a few thousand. So it's like we just took the recent sales and we dumped them on us, and it's, it just doesn't make sense because our cap rate after the county tax bill is paid of $18,800, I end up at a 4% cap rate. And that wasn't taken in consideration, and the rents and expenses, any of that. It was strictly sales.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, it's just among the board members. What's everybody think? Mr. Lawson.
I'll go ahead and share some thoughts. I thought the reason you kind of went to the income approach with properties of this nature is because, is a comp really a comp? And it could be that for whatever reason, these other properties are commanding higher rents. They're more valuable. They have better parking. Who knows? And so I've always understood that that's why we go to income approach, because you don't really have comparables. And when the county starts talking about guidelines for apartment units and types and so forth, these are small little parcels and they're independently owned. And if you can consolidate enough of them, then you have an opportunity to do something better. This project is only allowed by current zoning to have 7 units. And I think it has 11. And it used to be that RA 1426 was done by bedroom count, not unit count. And so this is a property where you can't renovate. Well, you can renovate, but you can't expand or enlarge or do anything. You're kind of stuck with what's there, and it's too small to rebuild. For a while there, these parcels were selling for towns, but the county board took that ability away. And so I think going with comps and per apartment unit is not the right way to go. That's just my opinion. I'll see if anyone picks up on that.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the last year's NOI that the appellant's reporting and the county's cap rate, it comes out $1,553,000. And, it's kind of been $1,500,000 was the sale price.
3 years ago.
3 years ago, yeah. So that would be that's the approach we take with every other property. I don't understand why we're now assessing properties on a per unit basis. I guess that's my question. I could have asked it earlier, but I kind of agree that I use that as a check, but I don't use it as the primary method of appraisal. Unless we're doing a redevelopment and then they take, it's a $86,000 a unit for land or whatever they have in the guidelines.
Right, but then though, when you look at the test, which is where she did do it based on income gross potential and then applied the guidelines, I mean, it actually comes in higher. So, you know, to me, I don't have a problem with the 1.8 million.
I
Because
guess why didn't we fill out the column for the appellant's numbers to be able to look at it side by side? And I mean, I have to go to page 38. Is this from a different year? This is 2020. These are actuals. So, you know, normally we see the appellant's numbers on the front sheet. I guess that's what I'm wondering here.
99.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth what it was purchased for 3 years ago.
This is Ken. I have a question.
Mr. Mayor.
I support Barnes' question of why are we looking at sales comps? Oh my God. What was that? I didn't even think I had it here. I've had a lot of technical difficulties this morning. I don't understand what the sales comps. I thought that I mean, we do apartment buildings all the time, and it's always income and expenses and NOI and GPI. Now all of a sudden it isn't. I can't get rid of this. I'm just lost. I'm lost. The appellant on page 101, the appellant's estimate of value is clearly a typo. And so I just went with it. It's fine. I certainly do that all the time. But I didn't see what was wrong with the operating year. He leased up. The operating year for 2020, it was leased up, and those are the rents, and maybe they square. Clearly, he in operating year 2019 didn't fill out the apartment rents, GPI correctly, did the actuals, so that explains why there's such a large the difference between 19 and 20. So it's a fairly stable building, and regardless of the guidelines for the test, that it could possibly go up 23% for 2021 GPI. So I'm, and I guess I can do more noodling, but I'm with you, Mary. It's not worth. It's depreciating a little bit, and if it were worth $1.8 million last year, it's not worth that this year.
The year before that, it was at $1.65 million. I mean, so it's moved considerably with little change.
Mr. Panoranda.
Yeah, I mean, we've already heard this case, and I think it's the same points, the difference that we have is Mr. Awadala here present, and but the points and the numbers are all the same. I think the difference in this building is regardless of whether they're charging right now, the rents that they're getting, they could be getting more based on, the comparables around. And also, just the fact that they're getting subsidized housing doesn't mean that their rents are going to be lower. The subsidized housing pays market rents. Sometimes they even pay more because they want to get tenants in the units. But for this year, I'm okay with it. I mean, it's pretty much we're at the same level as we were last year. And the income is the numbers that you're looking at, Greg, are the numbers that are reported on page 46, the income and expenses statement.
Yeah, just there's a $39,000 difference between what the county believes the income on this property is and what the owner believes it is. That's the heart of the issue for me.
Yes.
Who's right.
Right,
I
which
guess the county's opinion, they can just raise rents and these people are going to be fine. They'll just pay it.
You can't raise rent.
Yeah.
And we're maxed out at rent.
Excuse me. It's just among the board members right now. You don't get any opportunity to speak.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Right. I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, that 183 seems high, but when you look back to the 156 in the original assessment, I don't know. I don't have a problem with that.
How do you mean, Mary? You don't have a problem between those two numbers?
with the gross potential, I mean, if anything, you know, just based on, you know, the gross potential in the original assessment, I mean, I might have a little bit of leeway on expenses. But I don't feel comfortable going with column E and capping it up. You know, that puts it back at what it was, you know, purchased for 3 years ago. I mean, I don't think that equalizes it with other properties. Barnes, are you working on a number?
No, ma'am. What I had done was the same thing Greg did. I applied the county cap rate, but maybe to bring consensus, we should just go with last year's 1,650,000.
That's the year before.
That's 2 years ago.
That was, yeah, 2 prior years.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, he tried to appeal last year, but wasn't able to for whatever reason.
Well, I'd add that our experience on this board from apartments from Class A high rises to lower level garden apartments are all showing this year about even a couple of % less valuation. We're certainly not seeing the drop that the appellant is suggesting in percentage wise. And so the bottom line is the bottom line. This is fairly equalized at the macro level of what we're seeing from appellants, let alone people who don't appeal. So
right, I agree. Ms. Hogan, where are you?
I think I'm fine with where the county is, just because I don't know. Greg, do you have any number or anything?
I would go with the capped 2020 NOI that the appellant reported, 1,552,000. But if Barnes is at 1,650,000 and that's more palatable to everybody, I could go with that.
Mr. Penaranda.
It really, I guess it depends on how many people are in favor of a reduction. The only thing that I would suggest, like you said, Mary, I think the expenses that the appellant has, in my opinion, are also a bit higher than what we normally would see. What I did is I retested a couple times based on, you know, I like to see what the county uses as far as rental rates when they do the test, what my rates are, and I came up with also a higher number than the 1.8. But if I reduce the expenses that the appellant has, instead of 30.6 to 25.5 to what the county is using, I come up with an NOI of 106,712. And if we cap that at 6.4, it gives me a final value of 1,667,375. And, you know, if instead of just going to a number of 2 years ago,
right,
just because it feels nice, I would prefer to do that.
Yeah, I did similar. I just tested out the column E and used 25% and ended up at 1,678,600.
Right.
I go with Jose.
I'd go with Jose.
Yeah, me too.
Same here.
All right. I'm ready
Okay,
for.
well, based on that, I'll move that we make a reduction for this year on this property to 1,667,400, and that's based on reducing the expenses to 25.5 on the actual expenses.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor?
Aye, Ken.
Aye. Okay. Opposed? None? Okay, so it's unanimous. The assessment's reduced to 1,667,400 even, based on the actual operating year as reported, with an increase or a decrease of expenses to 25.5%.
The final value would be 1,667,400.
Yeah, that's what I said, didn't I?
Okay. No, I thought you said 167 even.
Oh, I'm sorry. 1,667,400.
Yep.
All right, thank you both.
Mary,
Yes.
Thank you, Mary. Can I just make sure I get clarification so I understand? You took column E and you changed the expense rate to 25%, which would change the NOI.
No, 25.5%.
25.5%.
Which is what you used in your test.
%. Okay, which changed the NOI and you capped it out at the 6.4%, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, you're welcome. All right, that completes the calendar for today. A couple things. So, okay, does anybody from the county or board members have any other business? No? Okay,
No.
so two things. One, I believe everybody received the memo about that all the meetings will stay virtual. And so I'm certainly very thankful to everyone, especially Mr. Lawson and Mr. Yates, who, opted to step up and take almost every in-person meeting that we were going to have. But really everybody to kind of step up and do that, that's really appreciated. But it's, I think a safer decision on the county's part for all of us that we will just be seeing each other this way. So, and then the second, I just want to clarify from Rosa, because I haven't gotten any agendas. When is our next meeting?
I'm trying to make one for September 8th. Right now, there's nothing else for 31st or the 1st. And you said since the 7th was off, then next one would be September 8th.
Well, since it's virtual,
okay,
we would be able to do the 7th. I mean, especially since we're skipping, I'm really worried. If we're skipping now, we've only got one this week and you're saying none next week.
Yes, there's no cases right now already. There's only about 3. So yeah, I'm trying to get at least 2 more for the 7 or the 8.
Mary and Rosa, this is Ken. I am available the 7th and the 8th now, but I'm not available the following Wednesday, the 16th.
Okay.
For planning.
Okay. But as long as we're virtual, we have a quorum, so we're good. But thank you, Mr. Meskin. All right, so Mr. Bailey, how are we, case-wise?
We're making progress on completing as many cases we can. We actually submitted, I believe, 10 or more cases to Rosa when I returned from vacation last week. And I know I have some that I'll be forwarding to her today. So I'm not sure if we received, I know we received, what was it? I know I got an email about a reduction being accepted by one of the appellants that actually presented today. As far as the other cases that were completed last week, I don't know the status as to whether or not they accepted the reduction, but we're providing her cases.
Okay, I just don't want to run out of time.
I understand, neither do I. So we're turning.
All right, so I would go ahead and try to fill the 7th and the 8th then.
Okay.
And then, so for now, I guess because of the 10-day limit, there's no way to have a hearing for the 31st or the 1st. So, everybody just to mark your calendars and you're free next week. So, and we'll hopefully be going on the 7th then. All right.
Sounds good.
All right, so we will stand adjourned at 10:54 and reconvene. Yeah.
I have an administrative question once we stop videotaping, a very quick question.
Right. Well, I don't think we have yet, so hold on one second.
Right.
Okay. Do you want me to stop now, Mary?
Okay, so we're going to adjourn at 10:55. We'll re-adjourn on Tuesday, the 7th of September at 9 o'clock. Thank you.